I returned. Not to reclaim. Not to explain. Not to prove. I returned. Because something in me was ready to be seen. Where I once disappeared, the place hadn't changed. The walls still held their silence. The air still knew my name. The shadows still remembered how I used to stand. But I was not the same. I didn't walk in with answers. I walked in with breath. I didn't carry pride. I carried presence. I didn't expect welcome. I expected truth. The floor creaked, like it always did. But this time, I listened differently. The light fell, the same way on the walls. But this time, I stood in it. I didn't flinch, didn't shrink, didn't disappear. I returned, not as a version of who I was, but as a witness to who I've become. I didn't speak right away. The silence spoke first. Asked, "Are you still you?" And I answered, "No, but I'm still here." I didn't come back to fit in. I came back to take up space, as I am now. I didn't come back to be forgiven. I came back to forgive myself for leaving and for needing to. I returned, not to start over, but to continue with clarity. I returned, not to be seen, but to see what still echoes and what no longer does. I returned with softness, with rhythm, with breath, and the place felt it, not with words, not with gestures, but with stillness. I returned, but I wasn't the same, and that changed everything. So much stayed: the walls, the light, the rhythm of the floorboards, the way the air held its breath between words, the way the silence waited for me without judgment. The place didn't change. Not really. The same shadows fell across the same corners. The same dust rested on the same shelves. The same echo lingered in the same hallway. And yet, it felt different, not because it shifted, but because I did. I saw the stillness, not as a trap, but as a mirror. I heard the silence, not as absence, but as memory. I felt the weight, not as burden, but as truth. What stayed was everything I once feared, everything I once fled, everything I once couldn't hold. No, I could. Not perfectly, not easily, but gently. The place didn't ask me to be different. It simply showed me what hadn't moved, and I stood in it, not to reclaim, not to erase, but to witness, to see what stayed, and what I now see differently. The same chair, the same window, the same quiet, but now I sit with it, I look through it, I breathe in it. What stayed wasn't frozen. It was waiting, waiting for me to return with new eyes, waiting for me to listen with a softer heart, waiting for me to stand without armor. And I did. What stayed didn't resist me. It received me, not as I was, but as I am. And that was enough. Something shifted, not in the room, not in the walls, not in the air, in me. The way I stood, the way I breathed, the way I listened. I didn't brace myself. I didn't shrink. I didn't scan for exits. I stayed, not because it was easy, but because I could. I didn't speak to fill the silence. I spoke to honor it. I didn't move to be seen. I moved to be real. The shift wasn't loud. It was quiet, but undeniable. I no longer needed to be understood. I needed to be honest. I no longer needed to be accepted. I needed to be whole. I no longer needed to be safe. I needed to be true. What shifted wasn't just posture. It was presence. I didn't perform calm. I embodied it. I didn't pretend strength. I softened into it. I didn't hide my breath. I let it guide me. The shift was subtle, but it changed everything. The way I entered the room. The way I held space. The way I didn't apologize for being. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't ask for anything. I just arrived. And that was the shift. Not in the world. In me. And the world felt it. It wasn't smooth. The return. The presence. The shift. It collided. Not violently, but undeniably. My breath met their memory. My silence met their expectation. My softness met their structure. And something cracked. Not me. Not them. But the illusion. That nothing had changed. They looked at me. Like I was familiar. But I wasn't. They spoke to me. Like I hadn't shifted. But I had. They waited for the version. They remembered. But I didn't arrive as him. I arrived as me. And that was the collision. Not of conflict, but of contrast. I didn't fight it. I witnessed it. The way their eyes searched for what used to be. The way their words tried to fit me into old shapes. I didn't resist. I didn't perform. I didn't shrink. I stayed. And the space had to adjust. Not instantly. Not easily. But slowly. I didn't ask them to change. I asked them to see. Not who I was, but who I am. And some did. Some couldn't. Some tried. The collision wasn't loud. It was quiet. But it echoed. In pauses. In glances. In the way I didn't flinch. I didn't come back to be accepted. I came back to be real. And that was enough. Even if it collided. Even if it cracked. Even if it didn't fit. I stayed. And the space learned to hold me as I am. Someone saw me. Not the version they remembered. Not the echo they expected. Me. They didn't ask, "Where have you been?" They said, "You're different." And I breathed. Not in defense. Not in fear. In relief. They didn't try to fit me into old frames. They let me stand as I am. They didn't rush to understand. They stayed long enough to feel. And that was recognition. Not loud. Not dramatic. But real. Their eyes didn't search for what I used to be. They met me where I am. Their silence didn't judge. It welcomed. Their presence didn't demand. It held. I didn't need to explain. I didn't need to prove. I didn't need to perform. I just existed. And they saw me, not as a return, but as a becoming. Not as a memory, but as a moment. Not as a past, but as a presence. And I softened, because being seen, without translation, is rare. Because being held, without condition, is rare. Because being met, without expectation, is rare. But it happened, and that was enough. Not everyone saw me. Not everyone stayed. Not everyone shifted. But someone did. And that changed everything. Recognition isn't about being known. It's about being met. And I was met as I am. Still becoming. Still breathing. Still here. No one clapped. No one cried. No one said, "We missed you." But something opened. Not a door. Not a gesture. A space. A space that didn't ask who I used to be. A space that didn't measure how I had changed. It just held me. Not tightly. Not loosely. Just enough. The welcome wasn't loud. It was quiet. But it was there. In the way the room didn't flinch. In the way the silence didn't press. In the way the air didn't resist. I didn't need words. I needed presence. I didn't need celebration. I needed stillness. I didn't need to be invited. I needed to be allowed. And I was. Not by everyone. Not all at once. But enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to soften. Enough to stay. The quiet welcome wasn't about return. It was about recognition. not of who I was, but of who I am, not of what I left, but of what I carry, not of what I lost, but of what I became, and I stood in it, not as a guest, not as a stranger, but as someone who belongs, not because I fit, but because I arrived, and that was the welcome, not loud, not grand, but real, and I stayed, still becoming, still breathing, still here.